Hi, good afternoon. I think we've got quite a few people joined now, so I think we'll kick off. So, good afternoon and welcome to this ReLondon panel discussion. How can we tackle single-use plastic packaging and drive the reuse economy at a city level, which is being delivered as part of London Climate Action Week. My name is Antony Buchan and I'm one of the programme heads here at ReLondon. We've got an hour for today. We'll aim for about 45 minutes discussion and then we'll have time at the end for questions. So please do use the question and answer function, which we will be monitoring. But please also feel free to use the chat function as well. We've got a panel of experts with us today who I'm really looking forward to hearing from. But before I ask them to introduce themselves, just a little bit about ReLondon. So for anyone that's new to ReLondon, we are a partnership of the Mayor of London and the London boroughs, working to improve waste and resource management in the capital and accelerate our transition to a low carbon circular city. As I said, we are here to discuss the scourge of single-use plastics packaging and how we move to an alternative reuse economy. Joining me to discuss this are four experts. Which I've asked them to turn their cameras on now, would be great, who I've asked them to introduce themselves and then pass on to the next panelist. So we will start with Ali. Ali, if you can introduce yourself and say a short bit about your organisation.
Great, thanks Anthony. Hi all, I'm Ali Malvern. I'm a policy and programme lead in the climate change and sustainability team at Richmond and Wandsworth, and my role is predominantly there to shape and implement our climate action plans to meet our goals of net zero by 2043 and carbon neutral at 2030. And in addition to that, I'm also the plastics policy lead for the London Council's One World Living programme addressing consumption emissions. Celine.
Hi everyone, my name is Celine. I work at City2C. City2C is an environmental charity that aims to prevent plastic pollution at source, and I am program lead. So I am leading the refill program, and that works in partnership with local councils, corporates, and policymakers to make refill and reuse more accessible for everyone. Over to Lowelle.
Thank you, Celine. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bryan. I lead on reuse at RAP and work on the UK Plastics Pact. If you don't know who RAP is a global environmental action NGO. We're transforming broken products and food systems to create circular living, and we work across all of the value chain. Within the UK Plastics Pact, we've seen a number of trials taking place on reuse. So I'm really excited to join this webinar this afternoon to delve into the detail about how we can really scale this. I'll pass over to Paul. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul. We think, the world's first fully circular supermarket. We want to sell all of the things you would normally buy in the supermarket with absolutely no packaging waste at all, so nothing we send you will ever go in the bin. We have built ground up a system to do this. We do a bunch of cool things with labels and lasers and have a hub in Battersea where we're operating out of at the moment. So yeah, we are actually currently, I'm allowed to say this, we're currently crowdfunding. So if any of you would like to see this thing exist in the world, you can actually go and have a direct impact on that at the moment as well. So yeah, nice to be here.
First error of not unmuting. Great. Thanks, everyone. And thank you for introducing yourself so succinctly. We've clearly got a lot of expertise. And what's really nice here is we've got such a broad range of experience from different sectors as well. So we'll get into the meat of it now. So we're all, and I imagine everyone listening as well, is acutely aware of the need to tackle plastic pollution and develop a circular economy for plastics. But with global supply chains, how do we actually deliver this locally, particularly as we still have governments around the world continuing to negotiate the Global Plastics Treaty? Earlier this week, we had Go Unpackage publish their fantastic report, A 30% Reuse Future for the UK. But what role do you see cities and local governments being able to play in the transition to a reuse economy? Can cities move faster and do more? And maybe I can ask Celine and Ali to come in on that first.
Yeah, I can go first. I believe that obviously cities have a huge role to play. Boroughs, combined authorities, all of the localized local authorities that really implement on the day-to-day how these things work. So if we're thinking about how do we establish, so I mean, just to say, most people agree that we need to go beyond recycle as a solution. It needs to be working in pair with reuse, and we've been monitoring at C2C for the last 8 years, refill and reuse attitudes and behaviors towards UK attitudes towards reuse. And even though they are conscious of this, there is still like a lot of education and awareness. And I do believe cities has this role to play. A third of Brits are still confused about what reuse actually is. So I just wanted to start by saying this. We need to educate, just explaining in very simple terms, what is reuse, how is that different from recycle, from refilling, and what are the shapes that reuse can take? Because it goes way beyond refilling your water bottle these days. There's so many things that we can do. So I'm just going to start with this, that cities have this incredible tool to be able to amplify that awareness and drive citizens to embrace reuse. But I'll pass on to Ali. You probably have other things to say.
Thanks, Celine. I'd certainly echo what you're saying. I think in my mind, it's the education piece around what is needed at the scale and point that we're at now to affect the change at the level we need it, going beyond recycling and really educating people so that they are informed to make the decisions that they need to be taking. Because I think cities, especially London, have a lot of innovation that's happening, but that innovation won't be effective unless there's demand and the community are actively sort of embracing it, which people can't do it in my mind unless they are aware of it in the first place and the need for it. So I think local government particularly are well placed to be engaging their communities and their residents and businesses as part of that to ensure that they have the appropriate tools and knowledge to be embracing what we're producing.
That's great. What I'm hearing from both of you is there's this real role to drive demand then. There's lots of stuff happening in development, and we're going to come on to that with the producers, but there's this real role that cities can help their citizens drive the demand for that. Well, Paul, is there anything that you wanted to come in on the role that cities can play in kind of making that transition happen quicker and move faster than maybe national governments are?
Maybe one sort of general point to add that's when people talk about reuse and often people think it's a packaging problem. Actually, it's not. It's a systems problem, right? So cities are well placed to help with system implementation, and there are some really interesting things they can do around supporting businesses that are trying to make change. But ultimately, it's about presenting people with choice of a different way of doing a thing, and part of it is supporting the new system, and part of it is helping shuffle out the old systems. So one of the problems people have at the moment is in our case, for example, with grocery, if you want to eat and drink and stuff the way you normally are used to doing, there really isn't that much choice. The system is there, the system exists, everything is packaged, and it's really hard to choose something else. So presenting people with choice by offering alternative systems is really important. And I think cities can really help with that in things where they're helping education and information, and also potentially with helping implement it and supporting businesses that are trying to drive this change.
And I assume you therefore see a role for kind of the policy framework to support that, and local policy as well as regional policy
Yes, it's so important because so much of this stuff is around what happened with recycling is everyone was like, oh, well, if you all recycle at home, everything will be fine, and you move responsibility onto the consumer. And the problem is the consumer then has to deal with the system, and then everyone's just keeping the same system, and nothing else is really changing. And I think there's a real opportunity for local governments and governments to help drive change by forcing it, essentially, by forcing new systems, whether it's through policy or rules or regulations or taxes, or making it easier for businesses that do this kind of thing to be competitive on price by supporting them, that sort of thing. But the ability to sort of drive change at scale is about giving people a choice that makes sense, I think.
So I think that's a really interesting point. So let's, Laura, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just quickly, yeah, I totally agree on that. And just, I guess, a bit of a build is, I think when you see sort of closed loop environments, then they've got that ability to kind of control their waste and almost just have reuse as a default option. So you just remove the single use. And I kind of feel like we need to transition that into like grocery retail as well, because ultimately, otherwise we're just putting more packaging on the market, aren't we? So we're just increasing SKUs, as opposed to saying, right, we actually need to turn off some of the single use and turn on some of the reusable packaging or refillable packaging. And I think that's just kind of something else I would echo and kind of agree that we need to do.
And just for anyone who's maybe not an expert in this sector, when you say closed loop systems, just so that people understand what you mean, we're talking.
So I'm thinking kind of events like festivals or sports stadiums where they're kind of closed off, and so they've got their own environment and they've got better control and ability within their own contracts. But also for anyone attending those events, they're kind of there, they're going to be purchasing drinks and food, and then you've ultimately got the opportunity to get that packaging back, whereas they're not just going to be walking around the street, they're hopefully in a closed loop event. So.
Okay, and I like that phrase, turn on, turn off. So we need to turn off the single use, turn on the reuse, and find some policy levers to help us do that. And whilst we talk about policy levers then, because in ReLondon's packaging footprint report, which we published last year, we identified 3 potential levers for change. So increasing the recycled content of plastic packaging, reducing or eliminating plastic packaging through reuse and refill, and obviously increasing recycling rates. Now we've got the collections and packaging reforms on the horizon, and in fact some in some aspects already being delivered. If you're a business, you've got to comply with simpler recycling already. But to use the phrase that Celine just used, how do we go beyond recycling? Do we think that the policy framework that we've got coming on stream around EPR and potentially DRS will have an impact on packaging design that delivers the reuse economy? And maybe, well, we can ask you to come in first because you're working very closely on EPR. And then Paul, it'd be great to hear from you as a practitioner who's already going beyond EPR. So I think that would be a really nice way to transition there.
Yeah, I think the feedback we certainly get from our members in the UK Plastics Pact, which is, you know, a lot of the value chain brands and retailers, is that they're looking at EPR, and obviously there's a lot of cost associated with that. And I think at the moment, although reuse obviously has some exemptions, so once you place something on the market, you're charged, but then you would not be charged if you obviously have a reusable packaging that going around the system. But, you know, we're hearing from business that that's just not enough financial incentive. So it's what can we do to go further? Is there an opportunity to, you know, have more financial incentive? Or even people might be familiar with France, and they've actually got, so for their PRI, they've got Citeo, who is basically a producer responsibility organisation. And they get 5% of the budget, that's the sort of surplus from EPR, dedicated to funding the transition to reuse. And I think that's something that would be great if we could have something modelled like that in the UK. I know there's restrictions under the currently sort of policy reform, but I think there's so many organisations calling for that, because the infrastructure, and also the report you just mentioned from Go Unpackaged talks about infrastructure, and that is critical, because as we're going to talk about kind of switching on and switching off, ultimately we need to start to build up that infrastructure in the UK over the next 5 or 10 years. So how are we going to do that if we don't have the money to do that? And, you know, I think we need to find that. I think that's particularly important for businesses to make that switch. So they need to have it. And there's also an opportunity to disincentivize single-use plastics, you know, already within the Environment Bill. So, you know, let's start to see some of those things that are positively encouraging businesses to act.
We need a bit of push and pull, right, to get there, to loosen the faucet on the tap, as it were, to turn off the single use and turn on the reuse. So some financial incentives to actually do it, but then some proper investment in the systems and the infrastructure needed. So Paul, you've obviously seen an opportunity before EPR or other financial mechanisms might drive change. So it'd be really great to hear from why you've come into that space now as a kind of early adopter.
It's funny because we often talk about EPR as a sort of general trend towards this. So when we talk to investors and things, we talk about this is where legislation is going. It's going to be favoring new businesses that are coming to the space and stuff. My general view on EPR is it's too slow and not strong enough, and all those sort of things that you'll often hear from people like me. And like I was at an event yesterday at one of the big consultancy firms who had a chat about reusable stuff, and the way they work about they have a whole circular function, everything, and the chat is always about what the businesses are asking them to solve for them when they're like, how do we be circular? Essentially, is how do we keep doing the stuff we've always done and somehow fiddle it into being circular? And I think that's one of the real issues with this stuff is like it is a fix, and it is like a sort of like a tack on, like a it's a small penalty that eventually the cost will just get passed on to consumers. Like, this is just going to make food and drink more expensive. And there's so many like hidden layers of cost in things like packaging already anyway. Like we found one study, we used Scotland, I think, Zero Waste Scotland study says the cost of your groceries, 7% of that is packaging. You are purchasing that packaging and you're then gonna pay someone else to pick it up from you a few days later, and then we all pay when it doesn't get recycled properly. And like, so there's all these hidden layers of cost in packaging and stuff anyway that people just don't really think about. In the UK market, where grocery is 220 billion pounds a year, 7% of that is 15 billion quid a year. People are spending on buying plastic and packaging and then chucking it in the bin. So like it's a bit mental. Sorry, side rant. So for us, like we sort of fit into the group where all our stuff comes back. So we have like everything. So EPR in theory doesn't apply to us. Our collection rates are really high. All the stuff we put out, we will be collecting back in. So we hope it starts to help. Like, don't get me wrong, I'll complain about stuff like this not being strong enough, but also anything is better than nothing, and I'm hopeful that it does start to have an impact.
So would you? I think someone's just posted super interesting rant. I would agree with that. I don't think it's a rant at all. Would you then? You talked early on about we really need to change the system. So Lowelle talking about what is happening in France, where part of the EPR money is going into actually investing in that. Is that something that you would really welcome? And would that help your business?
Yeah, and I think generally, like, countries that have national systems for things like DRS and stuff is very helpful on this front as well. France has got also a lot of startups in this space. They have there's one called La Fourgonne that started as a bottle refill company that essentially is bottle infrastructure. They move bottles around for refill and stuff. And they have more going on in that space in general. But we're so far behind on so many of these things. In Kenya, you're not allowed to use throwaway plastic bags. In France, you're not allowed to wrap fruit and veg in cling film. It's not allowed. So there's there's a huge amount of stuff that we're just generally behind on. My feeling is that EPR, as it starts to come in, there's going to be so much kicking and screaming from all the supermarkets who are not ready, that I think it's going to get kicked down the road, and I don't think it's going to happen as quickly as people think. Or I know it's supposed to be starting to happen already, and everyone's supposed to be reporting on it. But when that kicked in last year, it wasn't really the case. And so, my thing is basically if you continue to allow the system to run as it is and try and fix it from the side, it's not really going to do it. So we've always had this idea that essentially what you need is system redesign. You can't say let's keep doing the stuff and have more stuff and everyone has all the things and all the products are all available at all the time in all the places, and let's just be okay with the idea that products are seasonal. Let's be okay with the idea that things are made locally. Let's not move it all around so much. And maybe that, I think there's some room in policies around that stuff that's quite interesting as well. But I don't think it will be toothless. I don't think it's going to be the fix-all, catch-all, and everyone keeps talking about it like it's going to come in and have this massive impact. PCR, sorry, I'm good. The 30% rule for post-consumer recycled plastic being in new plastic products kicked in last year. All that happens is that, well, actually it kicked in very recently, properly. All that's happened is that all the bottles you buy that are plastic now have 30% plastic in, and they literally all have exactly just 30% and that's it.
People are playing to the rule, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. They're
do what you need
to
do, but not much more. So I can see that you've unmuted. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, maybe just to circle back, but also close the policy, because we could talk about it for ages. But agree, these existing legislative framework like EPR, DRS are there. They're very much focused on there's so many opportunities to graft reuse infrastructure and behaviors onto those existing legislations. So to me, that was the first point of it needs to go hand in hand with what Paul said. Like, we need to build education around the emotional connection that people have with packaging, because right now it's just like seen as something you can discard. Nobody cares about what they have in their hands. So there's a bit of that on the behavior side of things. But and to go back as well to the idea like of PCR of 30%, we could also equally ask to do exactly that for reuse targets. So I think what we're asking is to have for government, and I'm talking like central government, to be able to mandate legally binding and time-bound targets for reusable packaging. So that means, like, say by 2030, 30% of reusable packaging to be introduced in the market. And maybe supermarkets and big brands will only get to 30%. But if we get to those 30% by 2030, that would make a massive impact. And I think this is also the whole point of the Go and Package recent study.
This study, which is definitely worth going out, and if you haven't downloaded it, take it, get it off the website. It's definitely worth a read. But I don't want to be all don't want to be all doom and gloom, because there is already some really good stuff happening out there, isn't there? Like voluntary stuff, and people are trying to change the market. And so, Celine, I know that City to Sea have been involved in quite a lot of trials that have happened nationally. So it'd be great to hear about some of those. And also, I know, in London, there's some really great stuff happening as well. So, Ali, it'd be really great to hear about the Plastics Packaging Pact that you've just launched, and also work that London local authorities are doing with innovators like, I'm aware there are others as well, but aware of people like People's Profit, or organisations like People's Profit that they're working with. So, Celine, maybe we can hear about some of the projects you've been involved in with City to Sea, and then others as well. Lowelle, I'm sure you've got lots of national examples.
Yeah, great. I'm going to be very positive here about like what are the changes that have like people are actually making and so on. So in London, for instance, as part of the refill program, we have also an app that is incubating and locating every single reuse option that people can find near them near their live. And like I was running the numbers this morning, in 25, 3,000 Londoners every month go to the app to look for options to reduce waste. So when people say, people are not ready, I would argue against that. People are ready, but we need to make it more accessible, more available where they live and where they shop as well. There is this option about like it needs to fit their own lifestyle, and it needs to be on the high street, it needs to be online, it needs to be anywhere. So I was just again from a behavior point of view, it's really good. And we are also seeing so many independent London stores that come to us. We have more than 4,200 stations. So that is like coffee shop stores, independent stores that go to our app to just say that they accept reusables. So it's not necessarily refill options in their store, but just to say, you can bring your water bottle, you can bring your cup, you can bring your lunch bucket, and we will refill it. And all of that is also a way to tackle single-use waste. So that's more on an individual basis. And then on a citywide basis, there are so many, I'd say pilot or trial or phases to learn. And we've been involved mainly in 3 different trials about a cup scheme, a reusable cup scheme. So why cups? We believe that it's also an unnecessary waste, knowing that 7 million cups are discarded every day in the UK. It's just such an easy, in theory, an easy thing to avoid, but very interesting and complex system to run. So at a citywide level, we've run that not necessarily in London, but in Bristol and in Cardiff. All of that is in an open environment, as Lowelle said. So in collaboration with 25 different outlets, all working together for different brands using the same reusable cup scheme. And I think what it brings, our main learning for that was that people like to collaborate, like they really, especially in the independents, really like to collaborate between each other and be able to use the same system, because what we want is to like not add something where every single chain has their own things and then like a consumer has to go to every place and use a different system. So like that element, it was really a big learning for us. The frictionless experience, making it whether you go for penalty based, reward based, app, non-app, whatever it is, finding something that is quite easy to use, and for people, I mean. And lastly, the main point was to say for a citywide thing, and project like this, the element of awareness and working with those local authorities that work in the business engagement, that are able to engage with the local stores, to educate, to empower them as well, to talk about it, was another really key element. So I would say if we are going for a citywide level, it's so incredibly valuable to work with local council and to work with bids to be able to achieve this.
That's brilliant. And I think the thing about cups is they're very totemic, aren't they? So they're a real great way to get in and have that conversation with people. But your last point there about making it ubiquitous, high streets, and the need for business advice gives me a really nice opportunity just for a little bit of a ReLondon plug. So I'm going to stick it out there, which is the recent work that we did on High Streets Beyond Waste, which was delivered by our business transformation team, and also working in partnership with London Boroughs, so working in partnership with London Borough of Southwark, working with everyday high street businesses exactly to allow them to explore new opportunities to move to more circular business models, and reuse and refill being one of those really key things. So that's kind of working to make it available to citizens, but obviously we have a huge institutional presence in London. We've got 33 London boroughs, we've got the Mayor of London, we've got Transport for London, etc. So Ali, what role can that kind of institutional layer of London play towards transitioning?
Thanks, Antony. Well, I think we play a big role, or have the potential to, certainly. Like you said, there's 33 London boroughs, which represent a huge number of residents. So for me, it's a chance to be leading the way and to be showing our residents and businesses what we can be doing, and to stand by what we say and act accordingly by making it as easy as possible for businesses to follow our lead and for residents to follow our lead. So as you mentioned earlier, we've just launched the Single-Use Plastics Pledge, which is for London boroughs. It launched just under 3 weeks ago, and currently 5 boroughs have signed up for that. So the focus of that pledge is on eliminating unnecessary and problematic plastics from our operations and delivered services, which to me feels like the perfect gateway to be addressing these issues with our contractors and our suppliers. And those are the people that we see on the ground and residents see on the ground delivering our services. And if you can see those changes being made, I think it's easier and simplified for people to want to make the changes themselves. And I think, albeit a challenging thing to have 5 boroughs signed up within a couple of weeks, speaks to that kind of motivation and willingness for boroughs to be recognising the challenges and taking changes. Which I think is a strong start, and I'd echo that the business support element is vital to that. I think there's an element of pushing against the open doors, and all it takes is one business or one charity or one innovator who wants to do this, and to find one local authority who's willing to support it and champion it, that can really begin to have that domino effect. And we've seen that, like you mentioned, with Pupils Profit and the eco refill shops. We supported that in 11 schools across our 2 boroughs, and other boroughs have taken it up and it's gone national with it. And that's really delivering a tangible, affordable solution and meeting people where they're at with that. So I think there's a lot that local governments can be doing to support and champion the good work that's already happening.
And that goes to a point, doesn't it, that Paul raised right at the beginning, and then Celine has just raised, which is it has to fit with people's everyday lives. It has to be easy. It has to be convenient. If we want citizens to take this up. I wanted to give Paul and Lowelle a chance to come in here if there's anything you wanted to add. I mean, I've got a question maybe for Paul, which is there's been a bit of chat there about high streets and a physical presence. Obviously, your business is not. So you've chosen not to go down the high street route.
Yeah.
That was obviously a conscious decision. So interested to hear about that.
Yeah, so we think there was just one thing to solve in reuse, and that's adoption. How do you get people to use it? And there's so many things where it's like someone might be, here's a reusable cup, you can reuse it if you want to, but getting people to actually do it is a different story. So for us, this means a couple of things, but mostly it means make it easy, make it as good as the equivalent, and make it as affordable. So people are lazy, they don't want to spend more money. So if you can hit those 3 things and present people with an actual viable alternative, then things become interesting. So our model is based on The fact that for reuse, you have to be good at recovery. Our recovery rates are, like I've just seen Tony's message, up above in the high 90s. And this is because we do it ourselves. When we deliver, we collect. So that's why our model is online and direct to consumer only. We think a lot of the stuff around reuse that's hard is work that consumers have to do, carry things about, change their system to a jar system, all that sort of stuff. So I think a big focus, like literally everything we do is pointed at, can you remove a barrier to adoption? And so we try and make it as normal as possible. So we put things in, containers that are not super unusual. Like the containers, what they're made of matter to us, but it's not the thing that matters. It's important, but it's nowhere near as important as getting you to use it. Because if you don't use it, it doesn't matter what it's made of. And we, put it in the fridge, in the cupboard, like you normally use it. You don't have to give it back quickly. Just when it's empty, then you put it back in the thing for collection. So it's basically like using a normal product. When it's empty, you put it in our bag, back in our bag instead of in the recycling bin, and we just collect it when we next visit. So keep it, like, trying to make it as easy as possible is unbelievably crucial. And we think a lot of the other stuff is just difficult. Like, so for example, like not on our business, and this is what I'm just thinking about now, something like an extreme version of how would you do this at a citywide level. So you're talking about coffee cup return schemes, which are always private schemes. They're always piloted in a small area like a university or, something like that. And, people use them, and then we have evidence, and then nothing really moves on from there. Like if you wanted to do a really extreme system change version of that, what you do is you go, okay, in London, you want to launch a coffee shop, you have to use the London reusable cup. That's it. You can't use anything else. And then you have collection points everywhere for the same cup, and it's a citywide system that is run by the city. And you could probably justify the cost of running that on the savings you make processing the 7 million cups that get thrown away. So like there is like this idea that you can make it easy if you're willing to do something dramatic, something extreme. And what we need, the thing about extreme things get extreme results, and extreme results is kind of what we need here. We're in a place where we need that kind of thing. So yeah, so for us, it's about making it easy. And if you're talking about platforms and systems, I like what Celine was saying before about actually it's about a lot of different systems working together. Like we think our system is really good for groceries. However, it doesn't work for everything. So it's important that consumers have choices in their everyday things and all the different things they do, where they're able to make a choice that's better. And that means a lot of different options of versions of things. But it does need some sort of underlying cohesion. And things like return and reuse systems often are fragmented. Or so getting a universal platform to work is difficult unless it's driven by something like, make it part of TfL. TfL bins on platforms are just full of coffee cups. They're just full of coffee cups.
I'm really pleased you mentioned that. I didn't have to mention it myself, because I think we all remember I certainly remember when free newspapers were a thing, and everyone got a free newspaper when they commuted, and TfL had bins everywhere for you to recycle your newspaper. And then the phone came in, and so out went news and pans. But now maybe we could use that same collection, that same infrastructure to allow us to have a citywide.
I'd love to know what percentage of the cups are actually thrown away on train platforms into the bins on train platforms. I bet it's really high.
That's something we can maybe look to follow up. And I do know there are some city systems happening. Lowelle, you've unmuted, so yeah, please come in.
Yeah, some great points already been made. I guess just to add is that I totally agree with this kind of buy anywhere, return anywhere approach. And I think that's a big part of the convenience. And I think when sort of citizens are going into like different establishments and they're kind of having to get their head around a whole new system, it just makes it difficult. And so I think wherever we can have that cohesion, and have a concentrated effort, so everyone knows how the system works, they're not having to think about it every time they go in somewhere new, and like the convenience of obviously having the collection bins, but also for the businesses as well, like you said, some of the efficiencies they would get with maybe like pooling the system and having centralized washing facilities and kind of in the transportation links as well. And some people might have heard about Ottawa that are doing a similar sort of vision at the moment. So with Consumer Good Forum, CGF and Reposit are leading this work, and essentially they're looking at a city-based approach, but getting all the retailers and brands on board, and they'll focus on a particular number of product categories. But then everywhere you go in Ottawa, you're basically be involved in the scheme. So for citizens, it's kind of convenient. And they want to have it across the city. And so then it's like some sort of standardized packaging, but brands still have the opportunity to make their mark within the packaging. So I think that's because often that comes up about brands and how will brands be able to differentiate themselves. But if you have like a, agreed kind of fixed criteria that maybe it's the same bottle type, the same format, but then maybe the cap or the label is, an opportunity for a brand to express, their brand credentials. So I think those sort of things that we're hearing about city-based approaches are coming in more and more to almost prove concept. And then hopefully then you can just start to scale them across as well, those countries.
Can I add one more thing as well?
Yeah, please do.
Sorry, it's sort of a nuance to it, which is that so like in our case, we have our system is quite closed, and one of the reasons we think it is working is that we do the collection bit. So we think the work of returning things is difficult for consumers, and so and that's what they are saying to us. The thing is, like, when you do these fixes, if you can get solutions that work within the system that's already happening, or like within the behavior that's already happening, it's interesting. So like we take that work away to make it easy. But things like with the coffee cup, the interesting thing, particularly with that, is like a consumer is their normal journey with a coffee shop is they're on the way to work, they stop at the coffee cup, they buy it, they drink it on the train, and they chuck it in the bin as they're on the platform. And that's the journey that they normally do. So they already do the work of pick up the cup, drop it off in a bin. So if you can basically make that stay exactly the same, but just swap it out for a cup that gets put into a return thing, that's where that becomes interesting. So like the idea that a customer might be more willing to return containers if it's possible to return it at Sainsbury's as well as Tesco, they still have to do the return, and that is like extra work. Whereas the coffee cup journey is kind of like it's the same journey it was going to do anyway. So like this idea that for something like that to work, though, it would need to be you can literally get it from every coffee shop uses the same thing. The bins are all available everywhere, and it doesn't cost anything. So it has to be like, it's not a deposit thing. You don't have to scan it back in. You don't have to do any of that stuff. So for a system like that to work where it's universal, it needs to slot in and basically mirror the existing system, but then be reusable. And that's where really a lot of the difficulty is.
We need it in parallel. I think let's go back to the point Lowelle made earlier about turning on and turning off the tap. You can't turn off one tap until the other one is pretty much flowing at roughly the same rate, so that it's an easy transition, as you say. So I mean, it goes to, same with recycling, right? So we've spoken a lot about citizens, but knowledge, ease, and motivation. Those three things have to be in place, whether it's about recycling behaviours, whether it's about reuse behaviours. We spent quite a lot of time talking about consumers and how consumers can drive this change. I just want to think a bit about the supply end. So a lot of the major producers were at the Environmental Packaging Summit on Tuesday, where say Go and Package made some really strong recommendations for the producers and retailers. So how do we see the role of big brands and retailers? How do we persuade them to get in gear in cities and to start that change whilst they consider their wider global shift? Because I recognise they're part of a global supply chain, and that's going to take time. It's a bit like a super tanker. It takes a bit of time to turn. But how do we get them involved at a city level, which maybe which can move, be a bit more fleet of foot and move a bit more quickly? So maybe I could bring Lowelle in on this, because I know you work with a lot of international brands, and then Celine as well. Maybe really interesting to hear.
Yeah, certainly for Ottawa at the moment, they're sort of focused on non-food products, but then they are talking about doing another trial on food. And that's something, that might be an opportunity, in the UK to do something like that, a city approach. I don't think anyone's ruling it out. I think they just want to understand how it works. And I think what we've sort of talked about a number of times in these sort of forums is that sometimes these trials are set up and it's actually, you need to think about the scaling of it. So it's ultimately when you're thinking about the trial, okay, so what does it look like? What are the success criteria to make this scale? And I think as long as we can kind of maybe, when we're talking to the brands and retailers about that, to say, okay, if we can prove concept within this city, then the next phase of approach would be this, and this would be the scaled approach. And I think that's a really key part of this, because I think sometimes when we're talking to them, we may be just talking about, we just want to focus on this city for X, Y, Z reason. But actually, we want to see that it translates into their global supply. So I think that's a big part of it, is the kind of framing of it, and making sure that they're engaged in the process as well, and they see the benefits of getting involved.
Great. Okay, and Celine?
I second that. Absolutely. We like most big brands and retailers, they're not fools. They are observing what's happening, and they want to be probably the second to move, not to bear the risk, but like then to scale it up. And I think the role that they have is so crucial, and I completely agree. Like we need them to provide more reusable packaging for sure. So there's an element of leading by example and proving that these trials are working, are scalable. We don't have the same capabilities as they do, so it's about like proving that concept. To me, there's also an element of advocacy, reuse advocacy within those organizations. Usually, it's all these sustainable trials, pilots, or initiatives are led by the sustainability lead potentially, and it's really hard for them to convince to the top management. So there is an element internally to help those like really dedicated members of the team, and all of the modeling that we are doing is really towards that, really to convince the bottom line of what's happening. And there's also probably the last part is speaking the language, like they will move because they will have to with upcoming regulation. But if we could prove that in a positive way that reuse, brings customer acquisition, that it locks people in a loyalty loop because of rewards that you may provide to their consumer, to their guests, or opting into reusable or other types of monetary benefits. Then it changes the conversation, because those brands, they will see it as a sort of revenue generating in the long term. But I completely agree with what Lowelle said. We need to stop talking about 3 months pilots. And most of retailers have been involved in a pilot of a year, a week, 6 months or whatnot. So we need to be able to tell them, like, it's here to stay. No matter what you do, you will have at some point to get on board. So it needs to be a long-term strategy, and that's why there needs to be like this systemic approach to this, because otherwise it's gonna cost them way too much money, really.
Okay, bro. I'm gonna ask a challenging question maybe to Ali then. Ali, a major producer or producer consortium knock on Richmond and Wandsworth door tomorrow and say, we want to change the packaging system to reuse. What do the local government need? Where do local government fit into that?
Well, I think the role that we'd have in that situation is really around galvanising our communities and residents to be taking that offer up and demanding it. If someone did have that kind of impetus to be doing something, then obviously it'd be something that we can champion and support and spread the message of. But I guess I'll wait to see it happening.
And do you think kind of the infrastructure that, again, it's a bit of a challenge. What about the infrastructure? Because I know there is in the, hopefully people have had a chance to have a bit of a look at the Go and Package report, but there is a question there about how we use reverse logistics, how we can, Paul, obviously you've got almost a closed loop system in that you have a closed loop system with your customers. But if there were other market players moving in, would you consider working with others who are doing reverse logistics? Could you see that being part of it? And then Ali, maybe do the local authorities have a potential role in that reverse logistics? Can't get it out now.
The backhauling is a major issue, and so both for like there's the consumer bit. So the consumer work thing is always going to be a problem. So difficult for a consumer to bring stuff back, and every pilot that a supermarket has done shows this, and even the more recent stuff. And so like things like Tesco and Loop is old, that was done ages ago. So the consumer work is one thing, and then the next thing is there's a whole nother set of logistics that happens afterwards. Where does the container go to get cleaned? Where does it go to get filled? All this sort of stuff. So we looked at one example early on of someone who's doing reuse, and the thing moved, I think, 7 times in its journey. And the thing we've done is put everything in one place. So we do the cleaning, the filling, the labeling, and the distribution and collection and stuff. So we keep it all without moving all the stuff around. But this thing about like, if you want to get supermarkets to do this, there's one thing that will probably work, which is make it easy for them to make more money doing this than not. That's literally the only thing that will work, because they don't respond to the stick. But the carrot they do like, and their shareholders like, and these guys are driven by money ultimately, right? So they're not like they're not going to respond to other stuff. And then in terms of like a wider infrastructure thing, so we actually our logistics system, aside from the containers is just a part of it. Like you know, everyone talks about the packaging bit being it's the system that matters. So we use a whole bunch of different containers, and it doesn't really matter what they are. We can use, I think, even in our sort of jars, we have different sizes, and then I think we have 4 versions of a medium jar. It doesn't matter; they all fit through the system and work fine. So like, it's more about like we mark them individually so we can track them. It's more about knowing that, and so there's like, you know, the container system matters, but like our logistics system, when we come to look at other things, it will be more like the return loop for things like fashion or electronics or toys or other things that can be circular, because there is no two-way infrastructure. You return something to Amazon, you have to take it to the post office and they'll get it from there. Nobody can stop at your door and collect a thing and process it inbound. So reverse logistics are difficult and they don't really exist in this country. So ultimately, infrastructure is what we are building. And then I just had another thought on like, if the pursuit is this sort of universal container system, the answer might not be so much get it returned to a store, because this is why they don't work. The answer is probably more like make it so the collection point is the bin at home. So just make it like normal packaging, but it's reusable. So when it gets processed at home, there's a recycling bin equivalent that just has reuse stuff in it. And when the council collect it, they take it and they do the washing and processing, and it goes back into the system that way. Because then the consumer doesn't have to do anything different. And that's this big part of this adoption thing of like, how would you do it? So they just don't have to do any work, and that really is like the problem. So
I'm gonna call us to a close in a minute, but I just, on that last point, I didn't know if Ali wanted to come in. Ali, the voice of local government, gonna collect all the reuse alongside all the recycling.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Well, you see, I think local government are a great stopgap, aren't they, for everything? There's nothing we can't do. So I think for me, there's really the scale element of it. Like, to make these facilities to enable us to do things different with our collections and our facilities, we need to have that scale to make it viable, just with anyone else. And I think key to that is sort of twofold: having the partnerships that we need and the data that enables those conversations to be happening, to demonstrate the demand and to really affect that change. And there's also sort of anger and people getting angry about the fact that they're paying 15 billion on packaging every year and how unacceptable that is in a cost of living crisis, and therefore stopping shopping at places where they're paying for that packaging. And if you can kind of use that anger to affect change, then I think we're onto a winner. And that, you know, a combination of anger and partnerships can really achieve something different, I think.
Real. Okay, so I'm going to call it to a close on the panel discussion and go to some questions. But I think just a few points that I've heard. So what we need is, it really needs to be ubiquitous. It needs to be easy. We need multiple systems that fit with people's everyday lives. We need system change, and that system change is not just infrastructure, but it's also policy, and that needs to be funded in some way to make that happen. And then I think really Paul hit the nail on the head with sort of the money makes the world go round. If we can make the economic case, then we'll see people shifting and big producers shifting into this. So that is about that investment and that funding, carrot and stick, to make that happen. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that we've had through. And the first question I'm going to go to is a really interesting one, because it's kind of crossing over that divide. So we've talked about consumers, we've talked about producers, but the question is, what role do the producers have in driving that citizen demand, that citizen behaviour change as well? So we've talked about them doing the infrastructure, then providing it, but what role do they have in driving that demand as well? Who would like to take that? If Paul, Paul and Celine, I'll let you both have a crack at that one.
Mostly because this is what we do. So we're a retailer, but we also do essentially we make the stuff. So our model is we get things in big things and we put them into the small containers that get used like normal. And so like the thing here about offering consumers choice is so important. So this ability to make it so that, you know, people have a choice that's as good and as affordable, but also much more eco-friendly. So from our point of view, we are trying to do this. So my answer is more like, you know, I think there's space here for new companies to come in and do this, but like existing retailers, I think, have a big responsibility to try to change as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, in our last polling, 3/4 of Brits said that they want brands and retailers to provide more product in reusable and refillable packaging. That's of last month. That hasn't changed in the last 5 years that we've done this survey. It's just growing and growing. And I think just to add, like, yes, they definitely need to encourage behavior change. And I would just probably just add that it isn't like they've done marketing campaigns for as long as they existed, and they're really good at it, at driving that sense of desirability. So it's exactly the same, but fit for reuse. So to me, they're running marketing campaigns, instilling a desire for a new product would be exactly the same. It's just that the system behind it is less wasteful than what is the linear system. So it's not rocket science really, but it does require investment. So they do need to see a future and see money making at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's nothing in the same way as there about some of the brands that we see, which is making it aspirational. We know that the supermarkets are very good at, or retailers in general are very good at marketing the aspirational life that we all want to lead. And we're not yet seeing that in for reuse and refill. Paul.
I was just going to add this. So James has asked a very similar question, and it's about putting onus on the retailers to do this stuff. Yeah. One of the things that can have an effect here is, so we think there is just a monstrous gap. Like Greenpeace did a survey last year that literally said, supermarkets, please stop using throwaway plastic, and 3.5 million people signed it. And so like there is this big gap where into this space you can take a big old piece of Tesco, Sainsbury's pie, and like that is one of the things we think can drive the change, because when they see their money being spent elsewhere, that will matter. So when we try and present consumers with choice, please take it, so that like, you're not spending it in those people. And that's the thing that will motivate them. The stick doesn't work. They have their own sticks. They fight back. The thing is that will affect them will be customers voting with their wallets and things, I think. So.
Maybe let's ask. There's a question here from Julian Asher, which is about deposit return scheme. So I sort of briefly mentioned that the UK will have a DRS scheme coming in. It is not for refill or reusables, but an interesting question is, do you see deposits? I mean, Paul, you obviously don't have a deposit on your packaging, but maybe Lowelle, I don't know whether you're familiar with other deposit return schemes around the globe where it is for reusable packaging, and do you think that's an important element that we should be considering?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my personal thoughts on it is that we'd want to be using DRS for reusables, and it feels such a shame to crush the glass and then just recycle it. And why do we not get the soft drops that we've seen? I've seen them in France, where they've got soft drops so they can basically keep the container and then reuse it again. It just feels crazy. We're trying to reduce packaging and we're basically just crushing it, and largely it's going on the road, some of it's going into remelt. But it's interesting because Welsh Government, hopefully people might have seen, the Welsh Government position is that they want to focus on reuse as part of DRS. Yet to be confirmed how that looks, but absolutely, I think if we're looking at the waste hierarchy, we need to be focusing on that. And if it's too late for that within policy, which I suspect it probably is what's the then transition to reuse? Because if we're setting up these like reverse vending machines, the RVMs, to focus on recycling, how do we then transition them when we have got that sort of cultural shift of getting people to take things back, and then we want to maybe start switching it into reusables, and people say, well, it's too late because we paid for all these machines and basically they're focused on recycling. How can we transition that? So if it's too late now to think about that, I guess we'll have hopefully quite a lot of learnings from Wales, but there are countries around the world that do have reusables, and they have some that coexist, so it's just the same kind of machine as well that they could use. So I think there's definitely opportunities in that.
So we've got this, and I'm going to come to Celine as well, because I could see Celine nodding away, and hopefully she's got more to add to it. But we've got this real moment in time then, is what I'm just hearing from you. It's like we're about to bring in DRS for recycling, and if there's an opportunity we might miss the boat, maybe we should be thinking bigger, maybe we should be thinking about how we introduce reuse into that as well. I don't know, I've never seen the soft drop, so that's something that I shall be looking at when we finish to see what one of those is.
Essentially, when you put the bottle in, it kind of has like a little elastic kind of container, so when it doesn't literally drop to the bottom and smash, it basically lands on something, then it's moved down, so potentially sort of protects the container.
I was going to say that it sounds like the sort of thing that kids would love to use when you go somewhere to put the bottles in. I can imagine that being the thing that you'd have to share out the bottles amongst the children so that they could use the soft drop. I love it. Celine.
I mean, I just agree with everything. So I'm nodding in agreement that we need more. We need to take the opportunity. We have 2 years. I think it's coming, like the deadline is October 27, right, for DRS. It just lays the foundation. We're going to invest money into making this system. And if it's too late to add reuse to the loop, like we need to already think about how are we going to shift. And I think there are 44 countries around the world that have like a DRS system live. And most of them have started with recycling. So there are so much learning out there about how different systems have shifted in the process while having recycled to reuse. So just there's definitely work to do, and also having something universal. So like between Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, they all have, like, it's just making it a bit more uniform.
That sounds just like a utopian future where we're all doing.
I know. I mean, let's aim for this blue sky thinking here, but there is elements. If we are reflecting on the next phase of this, maybe the reuse part of this would be probably more homogeneous, hopefully.
And Ali, DRS is, potentially going to cause headaches for local authorities, but just integrating it into our recycling system. But if it was to get the waste out in the first instance with potential, the ever-present threat of emissions trading scheme, I guess that would, the government would really embrace that, and we'd love to see that working, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think there comes a point where you just have to accept what's right and do what's right and support it regardless of the change and challenge it makes. I think local governments or certainly can be stuck in their ways, but that's not to say that they shouldn't be challenging and changing themselves to adjust, just like everyone else is. And if we're not prepared to do it, then why would anyone else be?
Fantastic. All right, I'm conscious of time. I'd really like to say, firstly, if there's anything else that you've got a real burning desire to add into this debate that the questions haven't allowed you to do, then please say now. Or if there's any closing remarks from each of you, then please let me know if there's anything you want to add. Doesn't look like it, which is great. Okay, I think we've covered a huge amount of stuff today. I know I've been unable to read it, but I know that the chat function has been going crazy during this webinar. So there's obviously been fantastic engagement from the audience, and I know that some of you have also been posting in there as well. So I hope everyone listening has found this really useful and interesting. I certainly have. And all that remains is for me to say thank you very much to Celine, Lowelle, Ali and Paul for being involved in today. It's been really fantastic, and I wish everyone a good rest of London Climate Action Week. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.